Well, we're not happy with Nick Sirianni on this podcast, but Jalen Hurts took a very promising step, and you can feel good about that after the win against Cleveland. Stock up, stock down, coming your way right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Louie DiBiase. Joining you on this Tuesday edition of the show, we're brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL in all capital letters for $20 off your first purchase. The Eagles get to 3-2 after Sunday's win over the Cleveland Browns, a 20-16 final score. And, yet again, just like the past 2 years, and I'd say in 4 of the last 5 playoff seasons the Eagles have had over 6 years, we haven't felt great about a lot of these wins for the majority of the game. We're pretty frustrated through 2.5 quarters. The Eagles get hot, find a way to close things out at the end. But you're like, why does it have to be this stressful all of the time? This isn't sustainable, blah, blah, blah. Eventually it does collapse. That's kind of how we're feeling again after the Browns game. Like, we've seen all of this before. Definitely not happy with Nick Sirianni's performance, his in-game decisions, his out-of-the-game decisions too, which we'll absolutely talk about on this podcast. But I will say overall, something that I did leave the link feeling pretty good about was the performance of Jalen Hurts. I would say this is a stock-up performance from Jalen. And was it an MVP-like performance? Was it a 2022 kind of game? Even early 2023? No, it definitely wasn't. There were still some times where I thought he was struggling to see the field. He was slow to start the game in the first quarter. The Eagles, yet again, not scoring in the first quarter of a football game. With this offensive personnel, that's inexcusable. But overall, I will say, considering how bad he looked in that Tampa game and how everything looked like it was coming back to a head, his regression, his issues from last year, and even before 2022 felt like they were coming back to the forefront of his current state. To bounce back after that and really take the bye week to heart, like what they needed to work on. I don't know about Nick Sirianni, but Jalen Hurts definitely used this bye week to actually work on what he needed to fix. And I thought it was a promising step. Like, against a pretty good defense, that's a good front with Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith. PFF has the linebacker trio of Devin Bush, Jordan Hicks, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, ranked as pretty much the best trio of linebackers in the NFL from a metric standpoint. A pretty solid trio at corner, Roddy McLeod at safety. That's a pretty good defense with Jim Schwartz running it that was daring Jalen to throw on them and to beat them with his arm. By the way, they were playing aggressive press man coverage, not giving him a lot of free yards, even with A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith back. With all of that going on in a must-win kind of situation, I thought for most of the game, he did beat the Cleveland Browns with his arm and his legs. I thought he played a very efficient game, and he worked on, again, a lot of the issues that we saw before the bye week. Again, the slow start, absolutely concerning. But Jalen Hurts did not turn the ball over, and that's a huge step because he was turning the ball over at an egregious clip before this matchup. 2 weeks in a row now, 2 games in a row, he has not thrown an interception. I thought he made the right plays, when to get inside the pocket, step up, deliver the ball, when to escape, when to run, when to extend the pass with his legs, when to just throw the ball away. It felt like he was very in control of himself and the game for 4 quarters, or I would say 3.5, or 3 quarters. And that's a nice step because before this, it felt like Jalen was pressing for the majority of games, and they didn't have a massive lead, but they weren't down by 10, 2 scores where he's got to force things and play aggressive. So I thought he was calmer because they had a lead built up. That's when Jalen Hurts plays his best football, and I thought that's what we saw against the Browns, and he was accurate. Again, the Browns were not giving him a lot of space, and they've got 2 really good corners, and Denzel Ward, who, of course, isn't at 100% in that game, but I thought when he's on the field still looked pretty good. And then you've got Greg Newsome as well going up against Devontae Smith the majority of the game. Like, some of the ball placements we saw on those fade routes to A.J. Brown on the touchdown in the second quarter. You look at the go-ahead go ball where Jalen's got pressure in his face and delivers on the money to Brown one-on-one. Like, that was an underthrown pass, but it was on the money and put it where A.J. Brown needed to be. It was a clutch play the touchdown to Devontae Smith, like he put the mesh concept in motion, called the audible, got that open for a 45-yard touchdown. Like he was really in control and accurate, and he was clutch. And that's a good thing. Jalen Hurts in 3 wins this year has closed the game out in the fourth quarter. And he almost did it again against the Atlanta Falcons week 2. Like Jalen has shown a clutch gene against Green Bay, against New Orleans, against Cleveland now. And again, most importantly, he did not turn over the football. And that's just the most important part. So let me pull up these stats. Jalen Hurts, after the first quarter when he started off slow, overall finished 16 of 25, 264 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, a 64% completion percentage, 3.8% higher than expected, 13.4 EPA, plus 13.4. So that efficiency metric is really good. And then 0 turnovers. Like that's a good day for Jalen. And was it an explosive MVP-like game? No. They need him to have a more dominant, complete game eventually, sometime soon. But I'm happy with that performance. And I really like to see, again, that play where he steps up in the pocket and then he evades to the left in the fourth quarter. I got to have it play. Throws across his body, puts it on the money to DeJean, who makes a great sideline catch. Like you're seeing growth from Jalen in areas that he's struggling in. And that's important because we can't say the same for the Eagles head coach. I just really love the way Jalen approached the bye week. It feels like he noticed in himself and Sirianni and the Eagles in general over the last 2 years, he understood the situation of how the tightness, the tension, the drama, the pressure that's affected this team, that's affected him, that's affected his coach. It needs to change. They need to play with, you could tell Jalen was smiling in this game more than I've ever seen him, where the touchdown to A.J. Brown, he's laughing and celebrating and, dapping up Nick Sirianni, the enthusiasm, even in his interview after the game with one of the Fox sideline reporters, talking about how Nick Sirianni needs to be himself and how he told Nick and the whole team told Nick they need him to be more emotional this week. Now, I don't like the way Sirianni applied that advice, but I like that Jalen was at the forefront of trying to get his head coach back on track, because we've heard all these stories about how Sirianni and Jalen just don't vibe. Hurts could be like, that's a dead duck. I'm here. I got my contract. I don't have to worry about Sirianni. He's not my problem. No. Hurts showed leadership and said, I got to get this guy back on track, because if the 2024 Eagles have any chance of winning a Super Bowl, Nick has to be better. And I really liked that from Jalen too. So overall, the numbers look good. He was clutch. He played a clean game. His ball placement down the field in tight coverage was really good. I loved his decision-making on when to throw the ball away, when to run, when to use his legs to open things up for the pass, which you guys have heard me harp on Jalen this year a lot, and I thought he's gotten a lot better in that area over the last 3 games. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the performance against a good defense, and I think this is a game Jalen can start to gain some momentum and start to stack performances against themselves and start to put together a good run. And I think he has a good opportunity to do that again this week against the New York Giants. So I'm not saying this is a stock is skyrocketing type of performance, but I will say it's a stock up game from Jalen Hurts for sure. Who else had their stock rise after that win over the Browns? We'll get into the positives coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. This episode of the Locked On Eagles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game while you're betting, you can check out actually the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. And let's say you're riding with LOE 3, presented by FanDuel on Fridays on this show. You should have taken Jalen Hurts the over on 1.5 passing touchdowns, as I told you to. You should have took the anytime Josh Sweat sack that I told you to take. If you did, all you had to do is place $5. FanDuel is going to get you, and they still will, $200 back in bonus bets, guaranteed win or lose. All you got to do is place your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. We thank FanDuel for sponsoring the Locked On Eagles podcast today. And guys, today's episode is also sponsored by Prize Picks Daily Fantasy. Prize Picks is the most fun that I've had betting on the NFL. Daily fantasy sports. You can win up to 10 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as just 4 correct picks. So Take the over on A.J. Brown this week, getting 83.5 receiving yards. He's done that in both games against the Packers and the Browns. Take Saquon Barkley to run for more than 75.5 rushing yards. Cook up hot takes with your friends and win real money this football season when you and your crew run your game on Prize Picks. Again, it's the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long through Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use our code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 off instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Time now for Stock Up after a performance that I think had some ups. I don't think this is a game, while I wasn't very happy leaving the stadium, and I have high expectations for the 2024 Eagles, and I'm not happy with the head coach. At the same time, if you take a step back, there were a lot of good, positive things to build off of from this victory that can get the Eagles on a little bit of a run. And I will say, a win isn't always a win to me, even in this crazy, parity-driven 2024 NFL. But I will say, a win is kind of a win in this situation, right? Where even though we're not happy about it, 3-2 looks a lot better right now than 2-3. The sky would be falling right now, and things would not feel good if they lost that football game. So overall, there were some positives, and honestly, most of them came from the defense. I'm really happy with the defensive performance, and I'm especially encouraged by the defensive line. I mean, they get 5 sacks through 3 quarters. That's such a massive good sign, because this defensive line has been a dead duck all year long outside of Jalen Carter. And that's huge, because with the secondary playing so well, you can win with this defensive line if they play like they did on Sunday. Like, are you ever going to have a true alpha step up like a Hassan Reddick this year on the edge? Probably not. But I will say, you can win with the strength in numbers on the edge if Nolan Smith's getting involved. Like, Smith had a sack. So did Josh Sweat. Brandon Graham is a huge clutch play on third down in the red zone in a close game to force a field goal attempt that was missed. You got some good pressures from Bryce Huff, who finally looks good in a more traditional 4-point stance. You can win. Like, none of those guys are an alpha. They're all a 2A, 2B type. But if you have those guys all playing to a certain floor every single game, and you have the alpha-like performance of Jalen Carter that we saw against Cleveland, that we saw a few weeks ago against New Orleans, if Jalen Carter can be 2015, 2018 Fletcher Cox, then you can be fine with this defensive line. You can win a lot of games with this defensive line if you're going to get that from Jalen, and if you're going to get the play of this secondary that we saw from Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship. You can win games like this. Again, they're not going to have a Hassan Reddick this year. I don't think they're going to trade for an alpha edge rusher that might have to come through the draft or through free agency next year. But I do think that a lot of these guys in a rotation, if they start to pick up some momentum, can do the trick. But they need Jalen Carter to be consistently great. And that's kind of been an issue for Jalen over the last 2 years. But 2 of the last 3 games, he's been an absolute game wrecker. And that's a really good sign. And the young defensive tackles continue to impress me. Like, that's a story that we're not talking about a lot. Jordan Davis was solid, but Milton Williams and Moro Ijoma, I love what I'm seeing from those 2 this year. Like, they have really put it together, and there was a lot of pressure on those 2, because if Jordan Davis didn't take that step as a pass rusher, which he really hasn't, they were going to need Milton Williams and Moro Ijoma to take the pressure off of Jalen Carter. And when you add on top of it the inconsistent play of the edge rushers this year, inconsistent might even be an understatement. They needed Ijoma and Milton even more to step up. Milton Williams had a half a sack today, or on Sunday. Moro Ijoma blew up a play. Couldn't finish the sack. I wish it was his. Cooper DeJean and Bryce Huff cleaned it up, but Ijoma was the reason for that sack. He's been one of the most underrated players on this football team all year. Stock up to the defensive line. They were really impressive. And shout out to that guy on the screen, Brandon Graham. Like, 200 games into his career, and he's Pro Football Focus's 12th highest graded edge rusher right now. But I will give some credit to Josh Sweat, too, who right now is PFF's 26th ranked edge rusher, sneakily putting together some solid performances. His last 2 games, he has 2 sacks He's got 6 pressures. Again, the number 26 overall edge rusher this year, according to PFF. Josh Sweat, don't ask him to be your Hassan Reddick, right? Maybe don't even ask him to be your number 2. But when he's your 2A, 2B, if he's your second or third guy in a rotation, if he's second, you want a great number 1, he can be a really good player. And we're starting to see that Josh Sweat from early on last year start to pick up some momentum. And then Nolan Smith, I don't think he's ever going to be great, but between his athleticism, the speed, the motor, the competitiveness, that one play in the red zone where he sheds 2 blocks and chases down the running back to the sideline and makes a big tackle in a close game, that's what you're going to get from Nolan Smith. That's a floor player that you can work with as a third or fourth guy. Again, I'm not happy with his counter moves. As a first-round pick, he's not meeting that value. But as a role player, he's starting to put together some good games too. So overall, I'm pretty happy with the defensive line. And I'm overall really happy with the Vic Fangio. I talked about how Jalen Hurts, his stock is up because he really took the bye week seriously. The other guy I would say, I don't think Nick Sirianni did anything this bye week outside of get a haircut to change things. But Fangio did. Every criticism we had of him after that Tampa game, he took to heart. This defense was playing far more press coverage, close to the line of scrimmage. They sat Avonte Maddox for Cooper DeJean, and look how freaking good Cooper DeJean was in that football game. No, that was not me on the football field. We got to end that bit eventually, my guys. But anyway, Fangio played DeJean. Bryce Huff was in a 4-point stance more. Huff wasn't amazing, but this was definitely the best game of the season for Bryce. They blitzed a lot more. Vic Fangio, that's what you want, is somebody that listens, that knows, even if he's not listening to us, that understands what the tape is showing him that's wrong with his defense and doesn't wait a month, 2 months, a year, or maybe never makes adjustments. That was very encouraging that he used this bye week to turn this defense around. And yeah, again, it's one game. It's against DeShaun Watson, who sucks. He's the worst quarterback in football right now. They did what they were supposed to do, but I wasn't very confident heading into this game that the defense was going to do what they were supposed to, but they definitely did. I'll also say stock up to the secondary. I mean, can we talk about Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell? I watched for the last few years the Eagles not draft, and this guy was later in the draft, but he became a star, and he was my guy, Tariq, now Reek Woolen. I saw Seattle pair him up with Devin Witherspoon. I saw the Baltimore Ravens get Kyle Hamilton and then draft Nate Wiggins. I watched the Detroit Lions take Brian Branch when I wanted the Eagles to, and the Eagles instead took Nolan Smith. I've seen all these teams invest in young defensive backs and see the benefits, and I was jealous. But now I'm not jealous because the Eagles have those 2 guys, and it was one game, but Cooper DeJean, that game plan Fangio had for him, that's exactly how you use him moving forward. 6 tackles. He was responsible for 2 sacks. Only had a half a sack registered. Coming off the edge as a blitzer, he forced 2 sacks on Deshaun Watson. Slot cornerback, made some great coverage reps against Jerry Jeudy, including that one perfect coverage route, rep on the fade route in the back of the left end zone. To a T, played well at slot corner, as a blitzer, as an overhang defender and run support, made a big tackle in the red zone when the Browns were trying to pull the game within, a few points. I mean, that's how you use him. Use him like Malcolm Jenkins, like Brian Branch, like Kyle Hamilton. Use him by the matchup. You have now a Swiss Army knife that you stole in the second round, in my opinion. And then Quinyon Mitchell. I mean, this guy, as I mentioned the other day, should lead the league in picks. One thing he does lead the league in now after that game against Cleveland, he leads the NFL in forced incompletion percentage when targeted. He's top 3 in forced incompletions this year. I mean, his numbers in that football game, Quinyon Mitchell on Sunday against Amari Cooper and a pretty solid Browns trio at receiver, 5 targets his way, only 1 catch allowed for 10 yards, 1 pass breakup that we know should have been a pick if CGJ didn't run into him, a 39.6 passer rating allowed, which was a team low. I mean, this is awesome. My favorite player of the Eagles draft is this good. I'm giddy about Quinyon's performance. And then to add Cooper DeJean on top of that, I mean, I just wanted Howie to draft one good corner in the draft early on this year. He got 2. I mean, and Fangio, I loved the way he used DeJean, and I want more of it. Gino called this. He is a safety. He's a good slot corner, and I bet he's a good boundary corner. He's going to be an elite overhang Swiss Army knife safety. Like, that's who he is. Use him like that. What an upgrade over Avonte Maddox, who I love. I'm an Avonte guy. I love what he's done for the Eagles since 2018. Very underrated. Good dude. But Cooper DeJean, like, that's the guy for sure. I think I've got some more positives for you. I've got a couple more stock ups here before we take a break. Nope, that's stock down to Nick Sirianni. Don't worry. We'll get into that for sure. Stock up as well to the role players on offense. Like, yeah, obviously A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith coming back. That was a massive reason the Eagles won this football game. The clutch touchdown from Devontae Smith in the fourth quarter, a 45-yarder. Devontae's one of the most clutch players in the NFL. So is A.J. Brown. I mean, that icer on that go ball was just incredible. A.J. Brown is one of, if not already, the best Eagles receiver of all time. The Eagles are 8-0, by the way, when Jalen Hurts throws a touchdown to Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown. So that just shows their impact on Jalen and on this football team winning and losing games. But anyway, how about some of the role players? Grant Calcaterra, over 60 receiving yards in this game, steps up when Dallas Goedert goes down. How about Jahan Dotson? Only 2 plays, 1 carry for 13 yards, 1 catch for 10 yards, but both went for first downs. And that catch in the fourth quarter was in a big spot where the Eagles are up a score and they're trying to ice the game out. Jalen again gets pressured, rolls to his left. Not a great thrower across his body. Makes it a little difficult for Dotson, but puts it enough in his area for it to be catchable. Drags the toe, showed good body control. That's what you need from Dotson, Calcaterra. They're never going to be target monsters, volume guys in this offense with Brown, Goddard, Smith, Barkley. But as we've mentioned on the show before in the summer, we want this role to be, you're that sharpshooter. You've got Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, the old school Oklahoma City Thunder. You're only going to get a few shots a game, but when you get that shot, you better hit your 3 in the corner. Quez Watkins would not do that. That's what you need out of this. You need all the meat to be off the bones, efficiency, not volume. When your number is called, it's going to be rare, but when it is, you come through. Dotson came through on Sunday. So did Grant Calcaterra. Stock up to both of those role players on offense. All right, we'll wrap things up with stock down coming up next right here on Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, today's show is sponsored by Game Time. Game Time, they've got a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals and great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I just got my tickets for Eagles Browns through Game Time. Amazing seats, a great price. I made sure it was a great view by checking out that panoramic view of my seat on the app before I bought. Even check some other platforms, and if I found a lower price, Game Time has you never do. They do have the lowest price guarantee. Game Time will credit you 100%, 110% of the difference if you find lower prices on other platforms. But again, you won't. In Game Time, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take out the guesswork of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Thanks so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. We're wrapping up this Tuesday edition of the show with stock down after a 20-16 win over the Cleveland Browns. And I got to say it, and we've talked about this guy a lot, and it feels like we're beating a dead horse, but the Eagles won in spite of their head coach yet again. Stock down to Nick Sirianni. Just was not good enough. Felt like outside of getting a haircut, he did nothing to change things during the bye week. The Eagles started off slow yet again in the first quarter, despite, again, getting A.J. Brown back, Devontae Smith, and Lane Johnson. And that's the annoying part. It's like there's no reason this good of an offense should have 0 points in the first quarter. They're the only team that hasn't scored in the first quarter this year, and that is directly coaching, because the first quarter is all about what you prepped during the week for your opponent, right? It's your initial 15 game plays on the play script. It's all about the matchup and the work you did. And then eventually the players take over. There's a lot of improv and you adjust just like the other team does to how the game is going, weather, conditions, injuries, everything. There's so much that changes it. But the first quarter, if you're a bad first quarter team, you're a poorly coached football team. You might not be a bad team, but you're not a great team, and you're a poorly coached team. And with Sirianni, again, this team, they still have his back. Like, he has not lost this locker room. Jalen Hurts, the players, they wanted him to be more energetic for this game and moving forward because they could see that Nick was losing confidence and he was being neutered by his owner and GM, just taking away everything that he does because they don't trust him anymore. And I think that's warranted, but he's a shell of who he was a few years ago, and I think they've noticed that. And I like, in theory, they were trying to revive anything that Nick does well and trying to get him back to who he was. That I can appreciate, even if I don't love the rah-rah, trash-talking head coach. But Nick Sirianni, just, again, the situational awareness of a rock. Like, he does that on the field. He doesn't understand the situations. That's why on 3rd and 1, in a field goal range situation, calls a 4 vertical shot and gets sacked, and then Jalen Hurts gets sacked, that a blocked field goal happens. Like, situationally in the game, he's terrible at making decisions. But off the field, too, it's like having a kid and wanting him to do something funny, like, hey, go give this to your mom or go do this to your sister. And the kid's like, okay, and he runs over, and he misses the point of what you meant and just, like, hits his sister, throws a plate that his mom was drying on the ground. It's like, wait, no, that's not what I meant. Like, that's what happened with Nick Sirianni cutting his hair, talking trash to fans after barely beating a bad Browns team, dodging tough questions with the media, even if he wasn't doing it on purpose, which I don't think he was, but bringing your kids to the podium. Again, he's just not aware. Like, read the room. Be aware of the situation you're in, your team's in. Your fans are in. You should not be talking. Your fans have every right to be upset about that win on Sunday and the way you played and what your direct role was in it. You should not be talking. And I'm somebody that's like, Eagles fans, if you can dish it, sometimes you need to be able to take it. But in that situation, no. Like, Nick should not be talking. He should not be shaving his head and looking like he's having his Britney Spears moment. And he shouldn't be bringing his kids up in that moment where tough questions are coming. I'm sorry. That's just not the place. Maybe the next day, I don't know. But he just, situationally, he just doesn't have it. He just doesn't get it at times. And he comes off as desperate right now. Again, he still has this locker room, and that's good. But it's not enough. It's just not enough for this team to be great. They're winning in spite of their head coach. So stock down to Nick Sirianni. Also, stock down to Nakobe Dean. Like, the defense played really well, but Nakobe, I don't know. I think Zach Bond, it was a really good signing from Howie. I think he's a solid number 2. I feel like you found your Kazir White, right? A guy that you don't lose because of, that's making solid plays. Doesn't have a lot of missed tackles, playing underratedly good in coverage, which I'm surprised about with Bond. I thought he was not going to be good in that area. But Nakobe Dean, like, he just looks lost in space. He looks lost in coverage. He misses tackles. He's had his moments this year, but Howie Roseman, look what you did with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, where you finally invested a top pick in the DB position, safety, corner, positions, plural. I'm not even saying you need to take 2 linebackers because I like Zach Bond. I want him to have a contract extension in the offseason. You have your Kazir White. Please find your TJ Edwards. Dean, I don't think he's it. Like, take 1 year to finally invest just one premier asset, whether it's a contract, a trade, a draft pick, into a Mike linebacker that can do it all, that can cover, that's a good tackler, that has speed and range. I'm not saying it's got to be Fred Warner, although I'd love a Fred Warner, but they need to do better than Nakobe Dean at that spot. So I'd say stock down to Nakobe Dean, just not impressing me at all. All right, that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Eagles. Thanks so much for making us your first listen each and every day. I'm Louie DiBiase signing off as always. Thanks so much for downloading, watching, and listening. And let's go Birds. Fly, Eagles, fly.